Bienvenido a Noche de Pesadillas, cuando el día muere y la oscuridad toma el control. Las pesadillas despiertan para adueñarse de tu mente. Cada susurro trae consigo una historia más terrorífica que la anterior. Y cada sombra proyectada por la luna esconde un secreto oscuro que espera ser revelado. Aquí no existen escapatorias ni refugios seguros. Solo relatos que penetrarán en tu alma y harán latir tu corazón al ritmo del terror absoluto. Prepárate, porque esta noche tus peores miedos cobrarán vida y te atraparán sin piedad hasta el amanecer. "11:47 post-meridian," the phone's cold digits proclaimed. Precisely then, the lift carriage shuddered to a halt, suspended in the void between the 32nd and 33rd floors. My thumb mashed the emergency call stud. Silence answered. No strident alarm, no disembodied voice crackling reassurance. Only the profound quiet of mechanics failed. And then, the floor indicator, a small ruby eye above the doors, began cycling through numerals utterly alien to this 40-story spire of glass and steel. I am Silas Vance, technician of the digital ether for Apex Holdings. Hours ago, the sensible world had clocked out, but a labyrinthine server migration held me captive. Now utterly alone in this ascending box, I watched impossible designations flicker past. 54, 67, 83. The elevator stirred again, not with the familiar vertical glide, but with a sickening lateral judder, a physics-defying shimmy that sent my equilibrium reeling. When the polished doors slid apart, they revealed no floor I knew. I stepped onto territory ripped from a bygone decade. Brown shag carpet, thick as moss, muffled my steps. Voluminous beige computer terminals squatted on utilitarian metal desks. Ghosts of technology passed. The air hung thick and acrid with the ghosts of long-extinguished cigarettes. A woman, crowned with an improbable architecture of hair and armored in shoulder pads, hammered at a keyboard. As she swiveled towards me, her features smeared, an unnerving blur like a photograph refusing to resolve. "Hello?" The syllable snagged in the strange, deadened air. She offered no reply, her attention fixed on the phosphorescent green text scrolling across her archaic screen. Behind me, the elevator chimed its summons. I recoiled, scrambling back into the metal sanctuary as the doors began their inexorable slide. My heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The indicator now displayed 12B. Another lurch, this time accompanied by a grating shriek of tortured metal I'd never heard from its well-oiled mechanisms. My hands trembled, instinctively jabbing the lobby button again and again. Futile. The display mutated, 19X. The doors parted on our familiar 21st century office space, yet warped into nightmare. Desiccated husks of plants littered the floor amidst drifts of sepulchral dust. Papers lay scattered like fallen leaves. Chairs were overturned in silent violence. Through the panoramic windows, where neighboring towers should have pierced the night, a sky burned crimson above jagged ruins. The air tasted hot, stale, ancient. From the corridor's depths, a sound arose. A dragging, uneven shuffle. I slammed the closed door button, the impact stinging my finger. The doors sealed just as a figure shambled around the far corner, humanoid in gait, yet disturbingly malformed in silhouette. My breath came in ragged, shallow bursts, sweat tracing cold paths down my spine. The elevator ascended once more, the indicator now a cascade of cryptic sigils I couldn't decipher. The next vista, our office but temporally displaced to mere days ago. There I sat, my own doppelganger hunched over a monitor, oblivious. I watched this echo of myself check his phone, sigh the sigh of exhaustion I remembered keenly, begin gathering his belongings. The night before the server migration commenced. I stepped onto the carpet, the scene unnervingly solid. "Hey," I called out, the sound swallowed by the normalcy. My other self walked directly towards the elevators, passing me by without a glance. His shoulder brushed mine. Reality fractured. A spike of pure agony lanced through my skull. I staggered back into the lift, nausea churning, the office dissolving into vertigo. The other Silas was gone. The display announced. The doors opened onto a cavern I'd never known existed within the building's bones. Endless rows of obsidian server racks marched into oppressive darkness, punctuated only by the silent, rhythmic blink of crimson warning lights. The air vibrated, electric, prickling my skin. Before my horrified eyes, the monoliths began to liquefy, cabinets drooping, components melting like black wax, dripping viscous tears onto the sterile floor. My fist hammered the close button. My phone's screen stubbornly insisted, 11:47 p.m. Time had snagged. I tried calling security. No signal bars bloomed. The screen flickered once, twice, then died, plunging into blackness. Another halt. This time the doors revealed the ground floor lobby, submerged. Shoals of silver fish navigated past the vacant security console. Kelp swayed gently where potted ferns once stood. Water lapped silently at the elevator's threshold, a contained ocean defying entry. In the murky distance, something vast stirred, trailing far too many fins. Floor after floor bled into impossibility. Our workspace fortified for a forgotten war. Sandbags piled against windows, framing sepia skies. The office transformed into a humid terrarium. Vines strangling desks, trees cracking the ceiling panels. A stark forensic tableau, delineated by yellow tape and numbered evidence markers, utterly devoid of life. My wristwatch, analog and steadfast, mirrored the phone's frozen moment. 11:47 p.m. The phone remained inert. I'd lost count of the impossible landings. The next stop presented the office as it should be. Clean, ordered, but eerily vacant. On my desk sat my coffee mug, instantly recognizable by the chip on its handle, a plume of steam rising from its dark surface. My jacket draped over my chair. My monitor glowed, displaying not a login prompt, but stark white text. Timeline divergence detected. Attempting to reconcile. Hesitantly, I approached. The coffee was undeniably hot. As I watched, the text on screen shifted. Multiple instances detected, initiating emergency protocol. Immediately, the building's fire claxons erupted, bathing the space in pulsing infernal red light. I spun towards the elevator, but the doors had slid shut. The indicator above them glared. Error. I stabbed the call button. Dead. From the nearby stairwell echoed heavy, rhythmic footfalls. The door handle began, slowly, to turn. The elevator chimed, doors sliding open. I hurled myself inside as something immense and shadowed flowed into the office from the stairwell. Its movement jerky, unnatural, like frames skipped in a corrupted film reel. The elevator plummeted, falling faster than gravity should allow. A scream tearing from the cables above. The display became a frantic, meaningless blur of numbers and symbols. My stomach vaulted into my throat. With a final bone-jarring halt, the doors opened. I saw myself, Silas Vance, stepping into this very elevator at 11:47 p.m., weary from the server migration, poised at the precipice of this temporal abyss. He hadn't noticed the flicker, the wrongness. Not yet. I strained to cry out, to warn him, but my throat seized, utterly voiceless. He pressed lobby. For a sliver of a second, our eyes locked across the threshold. My terror reflected in his dawning comprehension. The doors slammed shut. The carriage convulsed violently, throwing me to my knees. The indicator panel went berserk, flashing every impossible floor number, every cryptic symbol, faster and faster until it was a blinding strobe. Then, stillness. Silence. The doors whispered open onto the lobby. The real lobby. Normality, stark and almost painful. The night security guard glanced up from his crossword. "Everything all right, Mr. Vance?" Could have sworn I heard that lift acting up. On legs that felt like ill-fitting prosthetics, I stepped onto solid marble. My watch showed 11:48 p.m. My phone buzzed back to life in my pocket, a sudden flood of delayed notifications. "Fine," I rasped, the word tasting like ash. "Everything's fine." The walk through the echoing parking garage felt hyper-real. My car started. The streets were familiar, yet my eyes kept flicking to the rearview mirror, searching for distortions in the familiar reflections. Home. I bypassed the elevator, taking the stairs to my apartment on the 9th floor. The following day, the world hadn't ended. Apex Holdings hummed along. The server migration was declared a resounding success. No one mentioned flickering lights or impossible journeys. But the normalcy feels thin now, fragile. Sometimes, working late, the phantom grind of the elevator shaft reaches my ears. Sometimes, glimpsed from the corner of my eye, the floor indicator flashes a number that has no place in this building. I take the stairs now, all those flights. Good exercise, I tell my colleagues. Last week, though, descending the concrete well of the stairwell, I glanced through the reinforced window. Just for a heartbeat, the sky outside wasn't bruised city twilight, but that same impossible burning crimson. And my phone, late at night, occasionally forgets itself, displaying 11:47 p.m., regardless of the actual hour. I'm drafting my resignation, searching for positions strictly on the ground floor, because I know what coils within the shafts of tall buildings after closing time. I know about the wrong floors, the ones unlisted on any directory but waiting nonetheless, ready to show you realities that fracture the mind. And I know that somewhere, perhaps everywhere, in a version of that metal box, Silas Vance is still ascending, still descending, the doors forever opening onto impossible vistas, desperately seeking the timeline he lost. Sometimes, in the deepest hours of the night, a chilling thought surfaces. What if the Silas writing this never truly got out? It surfaced last Tuesday, the television, dragged blinking from its tomb in the cellar's far reach, a sarcophagus of dust and desiccated insect husks, a fool's errand. Better it had slumbered, forgotten. Now slumber evades me, sustenance turns to ash in my mouth, and behind my eyelids, the screen's gray poison replays, relentless. What it showed, what slithers towards me, even now. The house itself sang a siren song of normalcy. 3 beds, 2 baths, a patch of green yearning for summer. A steal, the agent chirped, foreclosure. The prior occupants, dematerialized, simply gone. Left the kettle on the stove, the mail in the slot. Their forfeiture, my fortune. Ink dried on the deed a fortnight ago. That first twilight, I descended into the subterranean chill, charting territory for a future workshop. My flashlight's beam, a nervous finger, snagged on geometry in the deepest shadows. A glass face, a cabinet of faux wood grain, antennae like skeletal rabbit ears. Relic of a bygone decade, 70s perhaps. Its sheer inertia when I tried shifting it was astonishing. Curiosity, that fatal flaw, whispered, "Does it still dream?" 20 minutes wrestled it free, swabbed away grime, located a thirsty socket. The power button yielded with a brittle click. I expected nothing. Static spat, a hiss like escaping gas. Then the cathode tube flared, painting the gloom with borrowed light. Recognition struck cold. The basement. This basement. Stark concrete weeping minerals, the same iron pillars standing sentinel, the familiar profile of the washing machine stark against the far wall. Yet not a live transmission. The washer in this spectral scene was an ancestor, cruder, bulkier. And the perspective, high, skewed, lodged unnervingly near the ceiling's juncture. A timestamp glowed balefully in the corner. 406-14-1994, 3:47 a.m. The image swam with the grainy pallor of ancient surveillance tapes. Stillness reigned on screen for dragging minutes. Then a tremor in the umbra behind the machine. A hand unfurled. Fingers like bleached twigs, skin pulled taut, translucent over bone. An arm followed, impossibly emaciated. A shoulder blade sharp as flint. A head lolling. The entity hauled itself into the stark illumination. Quadrupedal, yet utterly alien to any taxonomy of beast. Its limbs fractured motion at obscene angles. Its head swiveled, a full rotation, face perpetually locked onto the hidden lens as it scuttled. The face, dear God. Featureless epidermis stretched smooth where eyes should have been. A mouth bisecting the lower half. A rictus stretched too wide, crammed with needle-fine dentition. It flowed, boneless, up the basement steps. The feed jumped. A new vantage. The living room. The timestamp held. Through the Stygian landscape of the house it prowled, a methodical inspection. A hunt. My thumb mashed the power button. Futile. I tore the plug from the wall. The image persisted, luminous, mocking. The thing completed its circuit of the ground floor, then ascended. Another jarring cut. A bedroom. Beneath the blankets, the vague shapes of a man and woman, lost in sleep. The creature paused, observing, head canted at a degree that defied anatomy. Then it smiled. A strangled cry ripped from me. I seized the infernal box, hoisted it, hurled it down. The screen fractured, a spiderweb of cracks erupting across the glass. But the picture held. The thing within turned, slow, deliberate, towards the point of view, towards me. Its maw yawned, stretching, stretching, impossibly, obscenely wide. Darkness swallowed the image. Upstairs, bolt thrown, bedroom door shuddering under my weight. No sleep visited that night, only the frantic scrabble of fear. Dawn's gray fingers probed the window. I descended. The television was gone. Only shards of glass glittered on the concrete floor like fallen stars. But now movement flickers at the edge of sight. Shadows coalesce and disperse in the periphery. At night, a dry, chitinous scratching nests within the walls, and sometimes, caught fleetingly in mirrors, a reflection that is not my own. Something pallid, something grinning. Last night, tucked away in a forgotten drawer, yellowed newspaper fragments. June 15th, 1994. Local pair vanishes without explanation. The previous tenants, before them, also vanished, and the ones before that, a lineage of disappearances. The scratching intensifies, louder now, emanating from the cellar. I know its source, its patient vigil. I know the inevitable cadence of what comes next, but departure is a locked door. It forbids escape. The lights just died. A sudden suffocating blackout. My phone is inert. A cold slab. Footsteps, slow, measured, ascend the basement stairs, each tread testing the wood's integrity. It is coming, as it came for all the others who dwelled here. If this finds eyes, flee this place. Shun archaic televisions and the lure of shadowed cellars. Some secrets deserve their entombment in the dark. The doorknob rotates. Its silhouette blooms beneath the door. I hear the smile in the silence. It is here. Forgive me. This was written in haste. They insisted a warning must be given. The presence in the glass. It propagates through the telling, a narrative contagion. To know of it is to be known by it. I have erred gravely in relaying this, in speaking its name to you. It is already too late. Do not probe the dim corners of your room. Whatever impulse arises, do not turn around. It stands just behind you. Sanctity, they called it. A hallowed peace. Yet the air grew dense, almost viscous, the moment my foot crossed the threshold of that ancient confessional. No calm descended. Instead, a knot tightened low in my belly. From the shadowed interior, a sound, the thinnest exhalation, slow and tremulous. I recoiled, my gaze fixed on the narrow aperture. Above, the chandelier cast a jaundiced spill of light across the wood, scarred and weary. Abandoned, Silas the groundskeeper had assured me. Untouched for decades. Still, the certainty prickled. I was not alone within its confines. Tuesdays and Thursdays, I surrender hours to this century-weathered church, a volunteer adrift in its quietude. My domain lies near the rear passage, amidst the archives, cardboard tombs holding epistolary whispers, brittle council minutes, sacramental ledgers. Dust motes dance in the stray shafts of light, piercing the gloom of the cabinets. The paper sighs under my touch, fragile relics demanding careful cataloging, each entry logged meticulously. The church staff grants me solitude, a mercy I cherish. Crowds unsettle me, their scrutiny a physical weight. Down here in the basement office is unwavering cool. Focus comes easily, unburdened by the whims of weather. That particular evening, time had slipped its leash. Engrossed, I'd lingered. An elderly congregant, her voice papery thin, had mentioned missing records. perhaps tucked away in a forgotten closet near the confessionals. Curiosity, or perhaps simple diligence, spurred me onward. The main nave stretched before me, cavernous and still, my footfalls echoing unnervingly against the vaulted ceiling. Overhead lamps sputtered, bathing the corridor in a hesitant, uneven luminescence. Silas planned to lock the great doors at 9, he'd said, but his patience was a known quantity. He never hurried me. I moved without haste. In the chapel's leftward embrace stood the old booth, a relic overshadowed by its newer counterpart near the altar. A diminutive wooden door, a curtain the color of faded bruises. I recall stepping gingerly over a dislodged floor tile near its entrance. Silas had recounted its history once. The priest who'd presided here, claimed by death years ago, rendering the booth obsolete. Neglect followed. Some whispered of decay, others of a peculiar odor. Until that night, I'd perceived nothing amiss. Drawing near, my hand reached for the tarnished handle. Then it came again. Not a sigh this time, but a soft, stifled whimper, the sound of sorrow muffled by cupped hands. I froze. Inclining my head, I pressed an ear to the unyielding wood. My own heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Darkness pooled behind the worn fabric. No flicker of movement betrayed a presence. "Hello?" The word emerged as a breath, tentative. Silence answered, thick and watchful. Another sigh feathered the air. Perhaps imagined, perhaps not. Swallowing a knot of apprehension, I eased the door inward. Twin benches faced each other across a slender partition, its center pierced by a metal grid, the screen through which penitent and priest once exchanged hushed words. The air hung heavy with the scent of mildew and aged varnish. My fingers tracing the dusty bench came away grayed, empty, utterly empty. I scanned the cramped interior, the tight corners offering no refuge. A flush of foolishness warmed my cheeks. Still the unease clung, a miasma refusing to dissipate. That's when I saw it, a folded slip of paper wedged precariously behind the metal mesh. Gently I coaxed it free, the fragile edges yielding, tearing slightly. Brittle parchment whispered beneath my touch. Unfolding it revealed script, faded ink bleeding into the fibers, elegant cursive, decipherable only in fragments. This weight I carry, cannot speak it aloud. A disquiet settled over me. In the corner, a date, decades past. The author alluded to being ensnared by the church's silence, a silence left ominously undefined. I refolded the note, its presence strangely heavy in my hand, resolving to show Silas before departing. As I turned, a faint noise brushed my hearing, the whisper of fabric, like knees shifting on a prie-dieu. A swift glance confirmed emptiness. A sudden urgent need for open air seized me. My chest felt constricted. Latching the booth's door as securely as I could, I hastened towards the main entrance. Silas stood sentinel by the massive portals, his silhouette framed against the dying light. "All well?" he inquired mildly. A curt nod was my only reply. The strange sounds, the disquieting note, voicing them felt like admitting to childish frights. Later, sleep offered no respite. The confessional loomed in my dreams, the metal grid a stark barrier, faint sobbing drifting from the unseen side. I awoke near 3, drenched in cold sweat, heart pounding, throat parched. A glass of water did little to quell the tremor. It was just the old building, I reasoned. Just fatigue. Yet an insistent pull remained, a summons back to that shadowed corner, a desire for answers, for more fragments of that hidden story, lodged itself stubbornly in my thoughts through the long morning. The following afternoon found me arriving early, the church echoing with a hollow daytime quiet. A brief greeting to the woman at the reception desk, then a direct path toward the old booth. An anomaly registered immediately. The door stood slightly ajar. I distinctly remembered pulling it shut. Silas might have checked, I told myself, tamping down the surge of adrenaline. Yet my stomach churned as I approached. The air in the corridor carried a damp, mineral scent, like wet flagstones. Ancient pews groaned under the accidental brush of my arm. Stepping inside the booth again, a fresh wave of goose flesh prickled my skin. The dust on the bench, disturbed. A clear, undeniable impression of a palm print marred the gray film. My breath hitched. Words failed me, my mouth suddenly arid. I stood utterly still, listening. Behind the grid, faint but distinct. That soft, shaky exhalation, the sound of someone striving for speech, yet silenced. Leaning closer, ear pressed near the cold metal perforations, my pulse roared. Is someone there? The question hung in the dead air. Silence. Then my eyes caught another folded paper, tucked beneath the bench's edge. I retrieved it. The same spidery hand. This time the words spoke of guilt, of the church's complicity in concealment, an admission of fault forever withheld. The writer yearned for absolution, unobtainable without uttering the full truth. The script ended abruptly, mid-thought, unsigned. Tension coiled in my shoulders as I exited the booth. My hands trembled. I closed the door, its hinges emitting a low groan. Silas met my approach with his usual placid expression. He hadn't touched the booth in years, he insisted. No one went near it. His gaze held a flicker of curiosity as I recounted finding the note, showing him the brittle page. He shrugged, a gesture of mild dismissal. He'd mention it to Father Michael. Perhaps he knew of old confessions stored improperly. I withheld the sounds, the disturbed dust, the print. The absurdity felt too great. Over the ensuing week, the booth exerted a magnetic pull. Each time I passed, the fine hairs on my nape lifted. One evening, resolve hardened. I would stay late, alone, wait. Silas locked the main doors, entrusting me with the heavy key. He asked no questions. The chapel breathed silence. My phone's beam sliced through the deepening shadows as I circled the pews, senses straining for any irregularity. Finally, I stood before the confessional. A faint, almost spectral scent of old incense clung to the air. The door was shut tight. My pulse quickened. Carefully, I opened it, slipped inside, and pulled it closed behind me, plunging myself into near total darkness. Letting my eyes adjust, I settled onto the bench. The wood protested my weight with a weary creak. My palms grew slick. I stared at the impenetrable grid, half expecting a face to coalesce from the gloom. Only blackness stared back. Yet I heard it. A slight rustle, cloth dragging softly across wood. I don't know who you are, I began, forcing steadiness into my voice. But I'm here to listen. My heart hammered against my ribs. For an instant, a whisper seemed to brush my ear. I leaned forward, every muscle taut, a chill tracing a path down my spine. I opened my mouth to speak again. but the sound died in my throat. Then the exhale, so faint it might have been the building settling. "I'm here," I repeated, my voice thin. "I can help." My breathing grew shallow, tight in my chest. Moments stretched. Then something slid beneath the partition. Another sheet of yellowed paper folded neatly. My hand shook as I retrieved it, illuminating the text with my phone. Betrayal, conspiracy, a plea for forgiveness. The church, the writer claimed, had buried evidence of profound wrongdoing, affecting many lives. Anger warred with regret in the slanted script. The author blamed themselves for their silence. It concluded, "I seek absolution, but no one will grant it." A profound coldness seeped into my hands. I clutched the paper, my thoughts chaotic. "I don't know what happened," I said aloud, my voice cracking. "I'm not a priest. I can't absolve anything." A heavy, expectant silence descended. I pushed myself upright, bracing a hand against the booth's wall, my knees trembling. Opening the door, I stumbled out, heart pounding so violently my chest ached. The chapel remained empty, bathed in the dim glow of the distant lamps. I drew a ragged breath, forcing my legs to move. I locked the booth door behind me. The following days were a blur of forced routine. Hours spent in the archive room, sorting fragile documents, yet my mind remained tethered to the confessional, to the notes, the disembodied presence. Sleep became elusive, fractured by nightmares of the metal grid. A muffled voice whispering my name. I'd jolt awake, slick with sweat. My appetite dwindled. Concerned glances from the church staff met my assurances of being fine. Eventually, the gnawing curiosity overwhelmed my fear. I gathered the collected notes, spreading them across a table in the basement office. The handwriting, undeniably consistent across all pages. Scattered dates hinted at a timeline spanning decades, perhaps 50 years back, perhaps 30. Recurring phrases echoed, hidden truth. The church refuses to acknowledge. I cannot say more. A confession stalled, circling a cover-up, its specifics shrouded in desperate vagueness. The thought of presenting these fragments to Father Michael surfaced, then receded. How would he react? Was I trespassing on sorrows not mine to unearth? Yet the presence had chosen me, hadn't it? Or so it felt. Silas remained unmoved by my tentative mentions of strange noises. Old buildings groan, wood settles, wind finds crevices, he'd repeat patiently. I tried to cling to his rational explanations, but the folded papers were tangible, stubbornly real, appearing like offerings from an unseen hand. One late afternoon, drawn by an invisible thread, I returned. The church was hushed, save for the distant, ethereal strains of choir practice. I walked directly to the old booth, slipping inside, leaving the door slightly ajar this time. A small concession to the rising claustrophobia. I placed a small flashlight on my lap. The bench felt colder than I remembered. I focused on steadying my breath. Minutes crept by, then the soft shuffle, closer now. My muscles locked, jaw clenched. "I'm listening," I whispered, the sound fragile in the stillness. "I have the papers. I've seen what you wrote." My voice trembled. I leaned towards the grid, peering into the tenebrous space beyond. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a jarring intrusion. I silenced it, unwilling to break the charged silence. The shuffling intensified, a definite sense of movement on the other side, though no form resolved itself in the darkness. My heart hammered. Sweat beaded on my temples. My fingertips tingled. A quiet exhale drifted through the grid, laden with desperation, the sound of words damned behind an insurmountable barrier. "You need to tell me what happened," I urged, my own pulse thundering in my ears. My stomach twisted. I braced for a voice, a tangible response, but none came. Instead, another folded paper slid into my space, thicker this time, densely written. "I cannot face judgment from those who remain silent about their own guilt," it read. "I came to speak the truth, but the church ignored me. They told me to stay quiet." I read it twice, the paper rattling in my violently shaking hands. My breath came in shallow gasps. I could almost picture the figure opposite, hunched, head bowed, wrestling with unspeakable burdens. I scanned the grid again. Nothing. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. A choir member passed, their presence pulling me back to the encroaching darkness outside. I felt suddenly vulnerable, exposed. A wave of nausea washed over me. Scrambling upright, I stuffed the note into my pocket. "I can't help you," I murmured, the words feeling inadequate, final. I don't know what to do. I waited, listening into the profound silence. Backing out of the booth, I pulled the door shut and walked away, limbs feeling leaden, head swimming. Reaching the side entrance, my fingers fumbled with the keys. Outside, the cool evening air was a shock against my feverish skin. I stood gasping, heart pounding, trying to grasp the reality of the encounter. Someone, something, sought absolution from me, a mere volunteer, for sins entangled with the church itself. Sins buried in silence. 2 days have passed. I haven't ventured near that corner of the chapel. Avoidance feels like the only recourse. Yet the notes haunt my thoughts. Whispers of secrets the church refused to name. Of a guilt festering in the shadows. Spirit, delusion, echoes of past pain. I cannot say, but the sighs were real. The papers exist. An undeniable residue of suffering clings to that cramped wooden box. I lack proof, yet the memory of that muffled, struggling presence chills me. Something remains, waiting to confess, yearning for an absolution tied to a sin the institution itself may have committed or concealed. Should I delve deeper or flee? I am caught, suspended in the penumbra of this old building's secrets. My hands tremble at the thought, and my gaze invariably drifts towards the confessional doors whenever I pass. Something in that ancient wood still calls, and I fear I lack the strength to keep listening, yet fear more that I may be unable to stop. Dust lay thick as velvet shroud over the forsaken ride's floor, disturbed only by the stark imprint of recent passage. A chill, colder than the evening air, snaked up my spine. Adventure had soured on the tongue. This trespass conceived in exhilaration, now curdled into the genesis of a horror none of us could have imagined, let alone escape. It was Lyra's siren call, naturally. Always the firebrand, Lyra, forever nudging us toward the precipice of the untried. She dangled photos before us. Paradise Park, a skeletal monument to forgotten joy rotting just beyond the city limits, vines strangling rusted steel. How could we deny such morbid beauty? There was Lyra, luminous with recklessness. Finn, her shadow, ever striving to capture her mercurial gaze. Maya, my confidant since scraped knees and playground oaths. And I, Elias, the reluctant anchor invariably swept along by their currents. We breached Paradise Park's perimeter as twilight bled across the sky, draping the skeletal gates and spectral signage in hues of bruise and ember. A decade derelict, undone by misfortune and flawed steel, it exhaled decay. Once vibrant structures now hunched like arthritic specters against the gloaming. Magnificent, Lyra breathed, her voice hushed reverence, eyes mirroring the dying light. A shiver, not entirely unpleasant, traced my own skin as we slipped through tortured metal. Our torch beams danced across blistered paint, fractured glass, illuminating the ghost of the central promenade. Silence pressed in, heavy, broken only by the grit scattering beneath our boots, the groan of wind-weary metal. The crooked smile, Finn proposed, gesturing with his light towards a warped structure crowned by a leering harlequin effigy, whose painted grin seemed less mirthful, more predatory. Curious, the entrance yielded too easily, groaning open under Lyra's touch as if expecting us. Inside, a labyrinth of looking glass unfolded. Our lights fractured against silvered surfaces, some webbed with cracks, others unnervingly pristine. Elias, look! Maya's voice warped, echoing strangely. Her beam pinned a trail in the floor's gray film, distinct footprints, unsettlingly recent. Vandals, maybe, Finn offered, the bravado thin in his tone. We trailed the phantom steps deeper into the distorted reality, reflections twisting us into grotesque parodies. An icy dread bloomed in my chest. The dust around the prints seemed barely settled. A sharp intake of breath beside me. Lyra. A reflection, she whispered. Not ours. Tall, so thin. Shadow for a face. I spun, saw only our frantic selves multiplied infinitely. Before denial could form, a sound ripped through the air, laughter shrill and discordant, utterly alien. Pure instinct screamed, run. We scrambled, disoriented, trapped in a kaleidoscope of terror, our own panicked faces mocking us from every angle. The laughter pursued, closer now, punctuated by a skittering cadence, the rhythm of too many limbs on dusty boards. "Moonlight!" Finn yelled, pointing. We tumbled out, gasping. Relief flared, then died. We spilled from the crooked smile not into stillness, but into a phantasmagoria. The night air thrummed with impossible life. The Ferris wheel, a rust-eaten giant, revolved with agonizing slowness, vacant gondolas swaying. Painted horses on the carousel surged in their circular prison, frozen mid-gallop, yet undeniably moving. Tinny off-key calliope notes dripped through the air, weaving with the spectral echoes of laughter and shouts from a crowd long since departed. "We have to leave," Maya choked out, voice trembling. No dissent. We bolted towards the gates, but the geography warped around us. Paths coiled like serpents, diverting us, drawing us deeper into the park's awakened heart. Passing the carousel, a frigid horror seized me. The horses bore riders now, sable figures, features blurred, yet their eyes burned with a cold internal light. One head swiveled towards me, mouth gaping in a silent, awful shriek. I fled, heart hammering against ribs. Ahead loomed the Goliath, the ancient wooden roller coaster, its decaying timbers stark against the bruised sky like the bones of some leviathan. "This way," Lyra cried, yanking at a low-maintenance hatch near its base. It was the only conceivable sanctuary. The skittering pursuit intensified behind us. We plunged into suffocating blackness, the air thick with mildew and thyme. Our lights sliced feebly through the oppressive dark. We hadn't staggered far when a deafening clang echoed behind us, followed by the decisive click of a heavy lock engaging. No. Finn scrambled back, rattling the unyielding metal. Futile. Then the voice, not heard, but felt, resonating within the skull, intimate and vast simultaneously. "Welcome, players," it chimed, a sound both playful and steeped in ancient malice. Paradise Park frowns on late admission. Rules, you understand. But oh, how we adore those who disregard them. You make the game infinitely more diverting. A single bulb flickered to life further down the passage, illuminating the only path. We followed, compelled. The tunnel disgorged us into a cavernous space beneath the park's nexus, a graveyard of defunct mechanisms and broken automatons. In the center stood the entity Lyra glimpsed in the glass, impossibly tall, skeletal beneath a decaying ringmaster's coat. Its face was a smooth, white mask, utterly featureless save for two abyssal eye sockets. A contest, then. The voice pulsed, seeming to emanate from the mask, yet still vibrating inside us. Quite simple. Navigate my little kingdom. Find the gates before dawn's first light, and freedom is yours. Falter, linger too long. A languid gesture encompassed the broken figures littering the floor. And you'll join the permanent exhibition. A final peal of that chilling laughter resonated, and the figure dissolved into the shadows, leaving us stranded in the mechanical ossuary. Time lost all meaning in the ensuing hunt. We navigated labyrinthine service tunnels, emerging sporadically into nightmare distortions of the park above. Each zone presented fresh abominations, grinning jesters whose smiles stretched too wide around needle teeth, plush toys whose button eyes tracked our movements, shadows that coalesced and reached with taloned fingers. We lost Finn first, swallowed by the deceptive reflections of the mirror maze, his shout abruptly severed. Later, within the oppressive gloom of the ghoul galleon, something unseen snatched Maya, dragging her into impenetrable darkness before I could even react. Only Lyra and I remained, ragged survivors clinging to each other, sprinting through the grotesque theme park, now paling in the nascent dawn. Ahead, salvation, the main gates catching the first tentative rays of morning. We could make it. Then Lyra's ankle twisted. She cried out, falling. As I turned, stooping to help, they emerged, shapes of condensed night, flowing towards us from every direction. Lyra met my gaze, terror warring with a stark resolve. "Run, Elias," she urged, shoving me forward. "Someone has to tell." A fractional pause, a heartbeat of indecision, loyalty warring with self-preservation. That hesitation damned me. Icy grips closed around my arms, my legs, dragging me backward into the park's eternal twilight. The rising sun kissed the ironwork of the gates, turning them gold for an instant before they slammed shut with the finality of a tomb. Now, I am woven into the fabric of Paradise Park, another static exhibit, another spirit tethered to this purgatory of perpetual night and cruel amusement. Occasionally I perceive new arrivals, their faces alight with the same reckless curiosity that sealed our doom. A scream lodges in my throat. a warning desperate to escape. But all that emerges is the fixed, painted grin of my new reality. I can only watch as the game resets, as the laughter echoes anew. So should you ever find yourself drawn to the melancholy allure of a place left to ruin, tempted by the rusted promise of forgotten fun, remember us. Some gates are best left unopened, for in Paradise Park, the merriment is everlasting, and the horror knows no end. The vast emptiness of the Orpheum pressed in, a hollow giant breathing dust, and I, Ilara, a solitary figure pinned beneath its gaze, felt stripped bare. Centered on the stage, swallowed by the gloom beyond the lone worklight's halo, I traced the skeletal rows of ravaged seats, the motes dancing like phantom constellations in the stale air. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence, certain, utterly certain, that I was not alone. That first night in the derelict theater etched itself into my nerves. The memory alone still raises goose flesh. Necessity, sharp and uncompromising, had driven us here. Our fledgling production, desperate for a rehearsal space, latched onto my friend's mention of this forgotten jewel. My initial daytime visit confirmed its neglect. Plywood scabbed over shattered foyer windows, graffiti snaked across bruised plaster, and stepping inside was an assault. The cloying perfume of aged carpet, the damp decay of wood, the pervasive tang of mildew. The air, thick as velvet, choked with dust, caught in my throat. Broken seating spilled its stuffing, torn posters whispered forgotten spectacles, and the ticket booth gaped with splintered glass. Mr. Thorne, our director, and the others shared my unease, their faces tight. But the rent was a pittance, and beggars, as they say, cannot be choosers. That evening, Mr. Thorne delivered the edict. Solo sessions. For me. To command the space, he'd said. My first solitary arrival was an exercise in forced courage. The antique key grated in the heavy door's lock. Pushing inward revealed the main artery, a hallway disappearing into the auditorium's maw. Each footstep was an echoing pronouncement in the stillness. A faint, acrid scent, like scorched insulation, pricked my nostrils. Above the ceiling wept plowder, and bulbs flickered erratically or surrendered entirely to darkness. It felt less like entering a building and more like trespassing on hostile ground. I navigated directly to the auditorium. Immense. The stage stretched wide beneath thick velvet curtains. Their once rich crimson faded to a dusty shroud of brown. A tentative brush against the fabric left my fingertips coated in gray grime. Near the lip of the stage, a solitary spotlight clung to an ancient rig. I found the switch. It hummed, protested with a flicker, then grudgingly cast a weak, jaundiced beam. Barely enough illumination to anchor me. The silence was profound, broken only by the sibilant whisper of my own breath and the low thrum of the light. My skin grew clammy, a knot tightening in my stomach. Stage fright, perhaps, but magnified, distorted, as if preparing for the most critical performance imaginable. To banish the unnerving sensation of being watched, I began reciting lines, my voice unnaturally loud, bouncing off the vacant seats. And the seats, they seemed to possess a collective awareness, rows upon rows of silent, judging eyes. The dust lay thick, disturbed only by the clear imprint of my own path. I fought the rising tide of dread. A few lines in, a sound pricked the silence, whispering indistinct from the shadowed depths of the back rows. I froze. My mouth turned to parchment, my heartbeat a deafening drum against my eardrums. Motionless, I strained to listen. The susurrus persisted, a breathy murmur, before fading into a faint, metallic scrape. The building settling, I told myself, forcing air into my lungs. Just the old bones creaking. I resumed my lines. Then a voice, soft as exhaled air, whispered the very words poised on my tongue, an echo preceding the sound. Tears pricked my eyes. Icy tendrils traced my nape. Script clutched tight, I spun to face the darkness. Nothing. Broken seats gaped in the rear, their cushions ripped like open mouths, but they were empty. "Hello." My voice fractured. Silence answered. Waiting, feeling the fine hairs on my arms rise, I whispered my next line. The spectral voice mirrored it instantly. A visceral urge to flee warred with stubborn resolve. I forced myself onward, praying it would pass. After an hour that stretched into eternity, I locked the heavy door behind me, the key feeling cold and alien in my trembling hand. Confiding in Mr. Thorne the next day earned me a dismissive chuckle. Wind whistling through the cracks, Ilara. Or just opening night jitters getting an early start. He waved away my concerns. We had no alternative. I had to acclimate. So I returned as dusk bled into night. The sky offered little light, the street lamps failing to penetrate the theater's shadowed facade. Inside, the air felt colder, a palpable chill sinking into my chest. My hands shook subtly as I fumbled with the key. "It's just an old building," I chanted inwardly, a mantra against the rising fear. On stage, I began my warm-ups, pacing, stretching, testing lines against the oppressive quiet. Minutes later, a door slammed backstage, a sharp, violent report that jolted me, my heart leaping into my throat. I ventured back to investigate. The backstage labyrinth was a chaotic landscape of scattered props, skeletal furniture, and defunct lighting equipment piled like metallic bones. A door, presumably leading to the dressing rooms, stood closed. It groaned open at my touch, revealing a dim corridor lit by a single sputtering bulb. "Is anyone there?" The tremor in my voice betrayed me. No reply. My shoes crunched over unseen debris, possibly broken glass. Dressing rooms lined the passage, their doors slightly ajar. Peeking into one revealed cracked mirrors reflecting distorted fragments of the gloom. A naked coat rack, a bench shedding its slats. Spent makeup pots littered the floor like colorful pebbles. Dusty wigs perched on impassive mannequin heads, their synthetic hair tangled and matted. The scent of must and disuse hung heavy. At the corridor's terminus, a sturdy door bore a faded label. Basement, locked, solid. I rattled the handle uselessly. Another slam echoed, this time distinctly from the stage area. Pulse throbbing in my neck, I hurried back. The stage appeared undisturbed, save for one glaring anomaly. The spotlight was extinguished. I hadn't touched it. Plunged into near-total darkness, I fumbled for my phone, its small light carving a hesitant path through the black. Near the stage wing, I located the circuit box and flipped the spotlight switch. It flickered back to life. My gaze swept across the auditorium's seats. An unshakable conviction settled upon me. They were occupied. Though I saw no one, the weight of unseen eyes pressed down. My scalp tingled. Breath hitched in my chest. Enough. I gathered my things and fled, the darkness seeming to cling to my back. The following day, I arrived earlier, hoping daylight might dispel the shadows. While sunlight filtered weakly through grimy upper windows, the theater retained its inherent dimness. I augmented the gloom with a small lamp placed near the stage. As I began rehearsing, the whispering returned, closer this time, seeming to emanate from the wings. Again, my lines were anticipated, breathed back at me before I spoke them. My voice faltered, sweat beaded on my brow. Determined, I strode off stage to confront the source. Pushing aside a heavy, dust-laden curtain revealed a narrow passage crammed with forgotten props. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light. I searched futilely for hidden speakers, any rational explanation. Nothing. A sudden scuttling behind a stack of crates sent a jolt through me. Steeling myself, I investigated, only to see a rat squeak and vanish into the debris. Relief washed over me, fleetingly, shattered by the unmistakable sound of a door slamming shut elsewhere in the building. Later that evening, drawn by a morbid curiosity, I checked the basement door again. It yielded, unlocked. How? I descended the narrow, creaking stairs, the temperature dropping with each step, the air thickening with the smell of damp concrete and earth. My phone's beam sliced through the subterranean darkness. The basement was vast, cavernous, with low stone walls. Racks stood laden with costumes, spectral Cinderellas in rags, bearing stains like old wounds, and rips like frenzied claws had torn them. Old-fashioned dresses, suits, jackets, all ravaged. Masks hung from hooks like severed faces, their plaster expressions contorted into silent screams or leering mockery. Eyes hollow voids. Gooseflesh pebbled my arms. My stomach churned. I reached out, touching one mask. Its surface felt clammy, imbued with the cellar's damp chill. A low humming emanated from the far side. Picking my way over broken crates, my foot struck something metallic, an old lantern. I followed the sound. In a corner choked with more costume heaps stood a dilapidated dressing screen and a mirror propped precariously against the wall. Dust filmed its surface, but my reflection stared back, pale, eyes wide with tension. I realized I was holding my breath, forced an inhale. As I exhaled, a voice whispered my name, directly behind me. I spun, phone light slashing wildly. Empty air. My heart hammered against my ribs, adrenaline surging. Instinct screamed, "Get out!" I turned and fled upstairs, the basement door left gaping open behind me. Emerging onto the main floor, I found my small stage lamp overturned, its bulb shattered. A curse escaped my lips. The auditorium was dim, lit only by the faint glow from the high windows. My own gasp seemed to echo, but then I recognized it, not an echo, but the whisper, repeating the lines I'd just rehearsed downstairs. My hands trembled so violently I dropped my script. Snatching it up, I started towards the exit, my footsteps loud, urgent. Halfway down the aisle, a palpable rush of cold air swept past me. I whirled around. A fleeting black shape darted behind a distant row of seats. A chill deeper than the basement's cold permeated my skin. My lungs constricted. I didn't slow my pace. Outside, the cool night air was a balm. Leaning against the rough brick, I gasped for breath, pulse frantic, shirt clinging damply to my back. I needed backup, someone else present, but Mr. Thorne's directive stood, and some perverse part of me knew I had to see this through. So the next day, I returned, armored with resolve. Focus on the script. Ignore the periphery. I positioned myself near the footlights, keeping the shadowy seats in full view. I began. My voice, initially unsteady, gained strength. I consciously blocked out the creaks, the settling sounds, the phantom movements flickering at the edge of my vision. Yet the pressure remained. The palpable weight of an invisible audience, critiquing, demanding. During a pause, faint chanting arose, seemingly from the very walls of the theater. Multiple voices, interwoven, unintelligible. A dizzying tingle spread across my scalp. I pushed onward, raising my voice to compete with the rising susurrus. My hands shook. The chanting swelled, a distorted, uneven chorus, like a spectral crowd growing restless. Pressing my hands to my ears momentarily, I shouted, "Stop!" The sound died instantly, leaving a ringing silence. Gasping, I stood trembling on the stage. Perhaps a prank. I forced myself to check the main corridors, the lobby. Empty. The overhead lights buzzed their dreary song. Broken glass crunched underfoot. Heart pounding, skin clammy. I pushed open doors to storage closets, checked behind pillars, all locked or blocked. Then I heard them. Footsteps on the stage behind me. Slow, measured, deliberate. My throat constricted. Returning cautiously, phone light preceding me, I found the stage empty. But the footsteps continued for a moment, circling behind the heavy curtains before fading into silence. I had to continue. As I resumed my lines, the double doors at the rear of the auditorium slammed shut with echoing finality. The sound reverberated, making me jump so violently my knees buckled. My lines vanished. I just stood there, shaking. Seconds ticked by. I fought for composure, my breath shallow, sweat tracing paths down my temples. The chanting resumed, softer now, accompanied by a peculiar pressure in my chest, as if the theater itself were physically compelling me to perform. I launched back into the script, louder, fiercer, pouring desperation into the words. My voice cracked, but I didn't stop. The chanting intensified, matching my energy, and a strange static charge filled the air, prickling my skin, lifting the hair on my arms. I drove through the scene relentlessly. Upon the final word, the chanting ceased abruptly. The sudden, profound silence was almost painful. Ears ringing, drenched in sweat, fists clenched, I stood catching my breath. A minute crawled by. Then a faint scraping sound behind me. I spun. One of the heavy stage curtains was moving, billowing slightly, as if someone concealed themselves behind it. Every instinct screamed run, yet I moved forward. Grasping the thick, dusty velvet, I yanked it aside. Nothing. Only the cluttered backstage wing and a broken ladder leaning derelict against the far wall. Letting the curtain fall back, I felt utterly drained, profoundly uneasy. Night after night, I returned. The phenomena persisted. The footsteps, the whispers mirroring my lines, the slamming doors, the ebb and flow of the chilling chant. They became almost predictable companions to my rehearsals. Yet I noticed a pattern. The more energy, the more passion I poured into my performance, the more intense the manifestations became. It was as if the Orpheum itself, or whatever resided within it, craved the drama, feeding on the simulated life I brought to the stage for its unseen audience. My legs trembled constantly. A low-grade headache became my shadow, but I refused to yield. On my final night alone before the full cast rehearsals began, I felt compelled to check the basement one last time. Down the groaning stairs I went, phone light cutting the oppressive dark. The spectral costumes hung limp. The masks stared from their hooks. That familiar cold pressure settled in the air, and faintly from above, I could hear the disembodied chanting echoing through the empty building. I lifted one of the masks, examining its tortured expression in the stark light. Lines spiderwebbed its surface. It felt strangely heavy, dense. Then I saw them. Fresh-looking scratch marks marring the edges of the masks nearby, angry gouges as if something had clawed at them recently. My heart hammered. A sudden thud behind me made me flinch. Turning, I saw a headless mannequin had toppled over, its chipped torso lying amidst the debris. I nearly dropped the mask. Replacing it carefully, I scrambled back upstairs. The chanting in the auditorium was louder now, a vortex of sound bouncing off the decaying plaster. My pulse pounded in my throat. Stepping onto the stage, I found the single spotlight blazing, though I hadn't activated it. The chanting reached a fever pitch. Drawing on reserves I didn't know I possessed, I launched into my lines, pouring every ounce of energy, fear, and defiance into the performance. My arms felt numb. I stumbled over a loose floorboard, but recovered, pushing through. As I delivered the scene's final climactic words, the chanting sliced off mid-sound. Silence crashed down, absolute and deafening. My ears rang. Sweat soaked through my clothes. Taking a shaky step back, I scanned the rows of seats. Still empty. Yet the presence felt stronger than ever. A suffocating weight in the air. I grabbed my bag, walked off the stage, and exited the theater, this time without a backward glance. Outside, the night air felt cool and clean against my flushed skin. My hands still trembled. A strange numbness lingered in my cheeks. Locking the heavy door provided only a sliver of relief. I haven't been back there alone. Group rehearsals start soon, but the Orpheum lingers, a shadow in my mind, waiting. My body tenses reflexively at the thought. I don't know what entity haunts those decaying walls, only that it seemed to demand a performance, a tribute. And whenever I recall those sibilant whispers echoing my own thoughts, the knot of fear tightens in my gut anew. It feels as though the theater itself possesses a hunger, and for those solitary nights, I was its sole sustenance. Even now, recounting this, a familiar heaviness settles in my chest. I can almost hear the low thrum of that spectral chanting, and if I close my eyes, the basement masks stare back from the darkness. A solitary bark, sharp and sudden, fractured the stillness of my bedroom. Sleep clung to me, a heavy shroud ripped away by the sound, leaving my heart hammering a frantic beat against my ribs. I surfaced, sitting bolt upright, scrubbing the grit from my eyes, listening. More barks followed, echoing from just beyond the window pane, unnervingly close. A tremor of unease rippled through me. Reluctantly, I swung my legs from the warmth of the bed, crossed the cool floor, and parted the curtain. There, bathed in the weak sodium glare of the street lamp, stood a canine shape of unusual size. It was positioned directly across the narrow sidewalk, motionless, its gaze fixed unnervingly on my second-story window. I stared back, caught in a strange tableau, until a detail snagged my attention, sharpening the scene into impossible focus. The ground surrounding the creature was immaculate. Rain earlier that day had left a small patch of earth beside the pavement, soft, receptive to imprint. Yet beneath the dog, the mud and damp grass lay smooth, unmarred by any track. No sign of passage. I blinked, questioning my senses. The reality of the image. The animal's head was massive, its eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that felt almost physical. My breath hitched, a knot tightened low in my belly. Goose flesh prickled along my arms, my palms growing damp. Leaning closer to the glass, I scanned the ground again, searching for the slightest disturbance, any evidence of its arrival. Nothing. The mud should have held prints, a clear narrative of its path, but the earth offered only blankness. As if sensing my scrutiny, the dog canted its head slightly. Then with a fluid turn, it slipped behind the low stone wall bordering my neighbor, Mr. Henderson's property, and vanished. I waited, holding my breath, expecting it to emerge on the far side. It never did. Uncertainty held me fast for several seconds. My throat parched, the echo of my own pulse loud in my ears. Downstairs, the house slept in darkness, save for the faint sentinel glow of the small hallway lamp I always left burning. I unlatched the front door, stepping onto the cool concrete of the porch. No muddy paw prints greeted me. The surface was clean. The lawn glistened, damp from the rain, yet showed no sign of having been crossed. My own shoes sank slightly into the yielding turf, leaving distinct impressions. Tension coiled in my neck and shoulders. Perhaps it had approached from a different direction, I reasoned, though the explanation felt thin, inadequate. I circled around the side of the house, the wet grass slick underfoot, and peered cautiously behind Henderson's wall, where the creature had disappeared. Only an empty flagstone path leading towards the next street met my gaze. A breeze stirred, chilling the damp fabric of my t-shirt against my skin. I stood there a minute longer, listening, waiting for any rustle, any sign. Far off, the familiar yaps of neighborhood dogs punctuated the night, ordinary sounds that somehow highlighted the strangeness of my own encounter. A profound disquiet lingered. That unwavering stare had unsettled something deep within me. I retreated inside, securing the deadbolt, and climbed the stairs back to my room. Sleep felt distant. I flicked on the television, letting the late-night murmurs fill the silence for an hour before trying again. Darkness returned, but my eyes remained wide, scanning the familiar shadows, until exhaustion finally claimed me. Morning arrived late. I woke stiff, my back protesting a night spent coiled in unease. The familiar ritual of coffee commenced. Standing by the kitchen counter, waiting for the brew, a scent snagged my attention. It materialized suddenly. The rank, pervasive odor of wet dog fur, thick as damp wool. Frowning, I sniffed the air, turning slowly. I own no pets. The windows remained shut, the front door locked tight. I moved through the living room, checking seals, verifying locks. Everything secure. Yet the smell persisted, faint but undeniable, clinging to the hallway air, hovering near the sofa, even tainting the kitchen. A cold dread twisted in my gut. I threw open several windows, inviting the morning chill, trying to banish the olfactory ghost. It must be drifting from outside, I told myself, clinging to the damp air. But it lingered, an unwelcome guest. The day at work was a fog of distraction. Returning that evening, the smell met me at the door, subtly embedded in the very atmosphere of my home. My nerves frayed further. That night, close to 10, the barking erupted again. It seemed to shift, now from one side of the street, now the other, a phantom echo playing tricks. I hurried to the window. Darkness veiled the street initially, then movement flickered near the front gate. The same large form materialized, standing sentinel, staring. Adrenaline surged. I recoiled from the glass, my breathing shallow, pulse throbbing at my temples. Peering out again cautiously, I watched it pace, a restless shadow. And still beneath its unseen paws, the wet grass shone undisturbed, glistening under the streetlight without a single dark indentation. Enough. I had to confront this. I flew down the stairs, wrenched open the front door, and strode onto the lawn. By the time my feet touched the damp grass, it was gone. Vanished. I stood exposed, the silence amplifying the frantic thudding in my chest, the rush of blood loud in my ears. Across the street, Mr. Henderson was wheeling his bins to the curb. "Did you see a large dog just now?" I called out, my voice tighter than intended. He paused, shook his head. Heard some barking, yes, but nothing out of the ordinary. He offered a shrug and continued his task. I managed a brittle smile and retreated into the dubious sanctuary of my house. That night became a ritual of security. Every window latched, every door double-bolted. I settled in the living room, bathing the space in artificial light, refusing the shadows. Around midnight, the barking returned, this time sharp and clear, from the rear of the house. I shot off the couch, heart leaping, and moved to the back window, parting the blinds just enough to see. A dark shape slipped behind the fence, enclosing my small backyard. My knees weakened, my chest constricted. I rushed towards the back door, hand outstretched for the knob, but stopped short. A profound sense of wrongness washed over me, raising goosebumps on my arms, prickling the hairs on my neck. The barking seemed to migrate, now near, now distant, now startlingly close again, bouncing off the unseen corners of the yard. Pacing the kitchen floor, I fought for composure, my mouth desert dry. Water did little to soothe the frantic edge. After several tense minutes, I risked another look out the window. Nothing, just the dark fence line against the deeper darkness, the wet sheen on the grass, and then, unmistakably, the smell. That same cloying scent of wet dog, stronger here in the kitchen, as if something unseen had brushed against the very walls. Upstairs again, I pushed open my bedroom window, leaning out into the cool night air, scanning the low roofline, the alleyway beyond. Silence reigned, broken only by the distant hum of traffic on the main roadblocks away, and the sound of my own ragged breathing. Eventually, more barking drifted on the air, but farther off now, less immediate. I tried to rationalize, to convince myself it was nerves, imagination. Sleep, when it came, was shallow, fractured by sudden, inexplicable jolts into wakefulness. In the days that followed, the barking lost all pattern. Sometimes it punctuated the late afternoon. Other times it shattered the quiet just after dusk, or ripped me from sleep in the dead of night. Each occurrence brought the same visceral reaction. Muscles tensing, shoulders knotting, a heavy weight settling in my throat. Occasionally, peering out, I'd catch a fleeting glimpse, The large form, the dark fur, those unnerving eyes. Always near my property, always vanishing behind a wall or fence before I could get a proper look, and always leaving no trace. The smell within the house became a phantom resident, migrating unpredictably, sometimes potent in the living room, other times lurking faintly in the upstairs hallway. I scrubbed floors, aired out rooms, searched for any plausible source, but the odor remained, intangible and persistent. One evening, drawn by distant barks, I decided to walk the neighborhood, ostensibly for air, but truly hoping for shared experience. Jacket pulled tight, I ambled down the block. A few neighbors exchanged nods, preoccupied. They'd heard the barking too, they admitted when asked, but dismissed it. Strays, probably passing through. I didn't mention the absence of footprints. I didn't speak of the smell that had infiltrated my home. The words felt precarious, tinged with paranoia. Circling back, I swept my own property with a flashlight beam, examining every patch of damp earth. My own footprints stood out clearly. Beside them, nothing. The cool air felt heavy, the silence ringing in my ears. Inside again, locks secured. I sank onto the couch, the quiet pressing in. Later, deep into the night, a sound pulled me taut, scratching near the back door, not frantic but deliberate, rhythmic. Scritch, scrape. I froze, listening, every nerve alight. Rising silently, I crept towards the door. The sound repeated, slow, insistent. My heart pounded against my ribs, my hands trembled. With a shaking finger, I flicked on the exterior porch light. Through the door's small high window, a shadow loomed, tall, still. I instinctively stepped back, mind racing. Open it? Call someone? The scratching resumed. Then a low bark from the other side, morphing into a guttural growl that sent ice water through my veins. My phone felt heavy in my hand. Who would I even call? Animal control? The police? What would I say? I hovered, paralyzed by indecision. Another growl, deeper this time, then silence. Leaning forward again, heart in my throat, I peered through the window. The shadow was gone. My breath escaped in a shaky sigh. I switched off the porch light, retreating from the door as the cloying scent of wet dog seemed to surge, thickening the hallway air. My stomach churned. Sleep was impossible. Hours passed as I sat vigilant, listening to the house breathe, creak, settle. Every floorboard groan, every sigh of the wind became amplified. Suspect. Did I hear faint panting? The click of nails on wood? Multiple times I rose, checked locks, peered into corners, finding nothing but shadows and the lingering odor. Dawn found me exhausted, hollow-eyed. Over the next week, the pattern held. Barking, unpredictable, echoing around the neighborhood, yet always seeming to orbit my house. Outside my windows, behind the fence, near the porch. Each time the familiar tension seized me. Fleeting glimpses of the creature, large, dark-furred, intense-eyed, always trackless, always vanishing. I took to sleeping with a heavy maglite beside the bed. The precaution felt absurd, yet the anxiety was a physical presence, a constant hum beneath my skin. My appetite dwindled. I paced, checked windows obsessively, sniffed the air like a wary animal. The wet dog smell ebbed and flowed, a mobile haunting. I convinced my friend Leo to stay over one night. The thought of facing the sounds alone, unbearable. He crashed on the couch. Sure enough, around midnight, the barking started. I shook him awake. He heard it too, a strange, dislocated sound. We peered out windows, front and back. Nothing visible. He did comment, wrinkling his nose, about a weird smell in the living room. I feigned ignorance. He didn't push it. He left in the morning, leaving me once more to my solitary vigilance. Each sighting of the dog now brought a cold sweat, a frantic scramble in my mind for an explanation that never came. Neighbors occasionally mentioned the odd barking, but no one spoke of a specific animal, a lingering smell, or the unnerving feeling of being watched. Their casual dismissal only deepened my isolation. Yesterday, early evening, the barking again. I rushed to the window. There it was, across the street, near a cluster of overflowing trash bins, staring directly at me. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass, straining to see the ground around the bins. Smooth dirt, undisturbed. My heart hammered. Throwing the window open, I yelled, "Hey, get out of here!" The dog remained utterly still, ears pricked, gaze unwavering. Then with that same unnerving fluidity, it turned and melted behind a neighbor's hedge. No tracks. Again. So now I sit here, at my kitchen table, the narrative poured out. A familiar knot tightens my stomach. That phantom scent, wet dog, hangs heavy in the air. The windows are closed, locked, yet it permeates. Just minutes ago, another bark, sharp and close, near the front gate. How do I contend with this? The thought of calling authorities feels futile. The lack of physical evidence, the sheer strangeness of it, would surely paint me as delusional. They wouldn't find anything, and I would be left here, adrift with this chilling uncertainty. I don't know its origin, nor its purpose. I only know the erratic barking, the fleeting sightings through glass, the insidious smell invading my locked home. Every night is a bracing, every morning a weary awakening. There seems no end to it, this intangible siege. Another bark just now. Side of the house. My hands are shaking again. I have to look. I need to see if it's there, watching, waiting. I'm not sure it ever truly leaves. It began, subtly, on a Tuesday evening. The weariness from hours hunched over neuroimaging data clung to me like static. I remember shedding my satchel near the entryway console, the familiar thud echoing slightly in the quiet apartment. In the kitchen, I poured myself chamomile tea, the ritual a small anchor in the day's drift. Returning to the living room, my gaze snagged on the small slate coaster beside my reading chair. It seemed displaced, slid perhaps 2 centimeters north of where I invariably left it, aligned perfectly with the armrest's grain. An insignificant shift, yet jarring. My apartment is my sanctuary, its geography meticulously maintained through the solitary habit of years. A flicker of cognitive dissonance, I reasoned. Fatigue playing tricks with spatial perception. I dismissed it. The unease returned the following dawn. Running late for a university seminar, a flurry of grabbing keys and notes, my eyes caught on the bookshelf. One particular volume, a dense monograph on cognitive adaptation, leaned at a drunken angle against its neighbors. My book stands sentinel, spines flush, a regimented line. This deviation felt viscerally wrong. A discordant note struck in the room's quiet harmony. A sudden tight clench low in my stomach. Time pressed. I couldn't pause to rectify it. I dashed out, the image lingering, a tiny burr of wrongness snagged in my thoughts. In the ensuing days, the subtle disturbances multiplied. A framed abstract print, minutely askew. A velvet cushion, usually centered on the sofa, now nestled against an arm. The cap of my fountain pen missing from my desk, later discovered beneath the coffee table, resting oddly against a leg. I, Elias, who devoted my professional life to the intricate pathways of thought and memory, found myself adrift in the familiar territory of my own home. I began retracing my steps mentally, questioning unconscious gestures. Had I brushed against the frame, tossed the cushion aside absently? Each tiny anomaly felt like a hairline crack, spiderwebbing across the surface of my certainty. Enough conjecture. I needed data. I resolved to impose empirical order on this creeping ambiguity. Thus began the nightly ritual, a systematic photographic survey. Phone in hand, I moved from room to room, capturing the precise state of my environment, the arrangement of vials on my lab bench repurposed as a side table, the exact angle of the lamp on my nightstand, the stillness of each picture frame. It felt obsessive, almost pathologically so, yet it satisfied the researcher in me. Hard evidence, a baseline against the mind's known talent for confabulation, especially under strain. The next morning, I awoke with a strange alertness, a low thrum of anticipation. Retrieving my phone, I began the comparison. Bedroom, unchanged. Bathroom, identical. Then the kitchen, my heavy ceramic mortar and pestle, which I distinctly recalled leaving and had photographed. Beside the spice rack on the counter, now sat squarely within the stainless steel basin of the sink. A faint sheen of moisture clung to the stone. A visceral coldness seeped through me. I scrolled frantically through the previous night's images. There it was, time-stamped, mortar unequivocally on the countertop. Between that moment and this, no conscious action, no memory of moving it. The air in the room felt suddenly thin, charged. A knot formed in my throat. I lived alone, possessed the only key. The locks were modern, secure, checked nightly. No one had entered, yet the mortar had migrated. Later, delivering a lecture on attentional blindness, my own focus felt fractured, splintered, drifting back to the silent, inexplicable rearrangement in my apartment. The question echoed, persistent and unnerving. How? That evening, I returned with a heightened, almost painful vigilance. Deadbolt secure, entryway clear. My gaze swept the living room, overlaying the scene with the morning's mental snapshot and the phone's digital record. All appeared static, and yet the persistent prickle on my nape remained, the unsettling sensation of being observed. I found myself turning abruptly, more than once, confronting only empty air and dust motes dancing in the lamplight. Breathe. Rationality. The nightly photographic documentation continued, now imbued with a deeper, more pervasive anxiety. Days bled into a week, marked by these small, persistent flickers of displacement. Or so I thought. A more disturbing pattern began to surface, insidious and chilling. Reviewing the accumulated photographic log, I started noticing discrepancies not between the images and the present state of the apartment, but between the images and my recollection of taking them. A stack of journals I remembered leaving perfectly aligned was pictured slightly fanned. The time-stamped photo was the constant. My memory of the preceding state was the variable, the ghost in the machine. This realization struck with the force of a physical blow. I spent hours scrolling through the image archives, cross-referencing dates and times. Again and again, the objective record depicted stasis, while my internal narrative insisted on prior movement, subtle shifts that the camera denied. The evidence was irrefutable, yet my conviction remained. One night, bathed in the cold, clinical light of the phone screen, a tremor started in my hands. My pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against my eardrums. Nausea coiled in my stomach. Was this it? The quiet, terrifying onset of cognitive decay. Early onset dementia. The hypothesis lodged itself in my mind, a shard of Aus. My world contracted. I began declining social invitations, avoiding optional faculty gatherings. My meticulousness intensified, bordering on the pathological. Adjusting a chair, closing a drawer, each action warranted photographic documentation. My phone's memory swelled with thousands of mundane images, a testament to my unraveling certainty. Was it merely the crushing weight of research deadlines, cumulative stress manifesting in bizarre perceptual distortions? Sleep became a shallow, fraught state, punctuated by sudden awakenings, drenched in cold sweat, heart racing. Phantom sounds, a faint skittering within the walls, a soft click from the direction of the coat closet, propelled me out of bed, flashlight beam cutting nervously through the darkness, inevitably revealing nothing but stillness and the lingering, acrid taste of fear. Rationality dictated I dismiss external interference. No evidence supported it. The data pointed inward, toward the shifting landscape of my own memory. Fleeting images from the past surfaced unpredictably, hazy and unreliable as dreams, dissolving upon inspection. I began meticulously organizing the photographic data, creating timelines, searching for correlations. A pattern gradually emerged. The objects involved in these perceptual anomalies were often relics from my earlier life. Textbooks from my doctoral studies, a small sculpture gifted by a former partner, artifacts predating my current academic identity. A specific period began to loom large in this constellation of mnemonic disturbance. My early 20s, the years just before settling into my career path. I pushed myself to excavate the significance of these specific objects. Memories from graduate school surfaced readily, but one particular summer remained stubbornly occluded, a blank space in my personal timeline. I felt a deep, instinctual aversion to exploring. Attempting to force recall brought a dull, throbbing ache behind my eyes, accompanied by fragmented sensory impressions. The specific texture of peeling paint on a wall I couldn't quite place. The smell of stale cigarette smoke. I'd never smoked. The muffled sounds of arguing voices through a thin wall. A sudden spike of anxiety, a physical pressure tightening around my chest like a vice. Then, nothing. The connection would sever. I found an old photograph tucked away. Myself, younger, grinning awkwardly between two faces I no longer recognized, at some long-forgotten university event. The date stamped on the back resonated, a sharp, visceral pang of dread. My breath caught. I had to set the photo down, my hand trembling. The lapses began to bleed into the present. My keys, my wallet, momentarily misplaced, only to be found moments later in the most obvious spots: jacket pocket, desk surface, yet with no corresponding memory of having put them there. Each instance triggered a fresh surge of adrenaline, a cold dew forming on my forehead. It wasn't just the arrangement of inanimate objects that felt unstable. My own recent actions were becoming untethered from my conscious awareness. One evening, determined to confront the void, I sat before my laptop, the cursor blinking expectantly on a blank page. I would document everything I could retrieve about that missing summer. I managed perhaps 2 sentences before a familiar vice clamped around my temples. My jaw tightened reflexively. The low buzz of my phone went unnoticed. My vision blurred at the edges. I forced myself to stop, palms slick with sweat, focus dissolving. My own mind seemed to actively resist the excavation, erecting a barricade of physical distress. Time lost its definition. Days blurred. Lectures became automated performances, delivered from memory while my true attention remained snagged on the internal puzzle. Back in the apartment, the tension was palpable, a static charge in the air. Sleep offered little reprieve. The obsessive checking continued. The ritualistic comparison of photographic evidence against subjective experience, each comparison reinforcing the terrifying truth. The instability wasn't external. It was me. My perception of reality itself felt increasingly fluid, unreliable. One night, a sharp, metallic snap echoed distinctly from the bedroom closet. My heart leapt, slamming against my ribs. Adrenaline surged. I grabbed the heavy flashlight from the nightstand, wrenched the closet door open. The beam sliced through the darkness, illuminating hanging clothes, shoes neatly aligned on the rack. Stillness, silence, nothing out of place. Yet the sound had been utterly real, sharp, undeniable. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I stumbled back to bed, lying rigid in the dark, staring sightlessly at the ceiling until the first weak hint of dawn filtered through the blinds. The thoughts surfaced, unavoidable. Professional help. I considered contacting Anya Sharma, a respected colleague whose research focused on memory disorders and trauma. But admitting this vulnerability, this potential cognitive unraveling, felt like a profound failure, a betrayal of my professional identity. I hesitated, stalled, rationalized. One last attempt at self-diagnosis, one more strategy: audio journaling. Positioning my phone on the living room table, I began to record, narrating my evening routine, meticulously detailing the placement of objects before commencing the nightly photographic survey. The effort exacerbated the now familiar tension headache as I finally retreated to bed. The following morning, I played back the recording. My own voice, tinged with fatigue but clear and precise, described placing the ceramic mortar in the sink after use. I then compared this audio record with the time-stamped photographs from the previous night. They matched perfectly, mortar in sink. Yet the phantom memory persisted, insistent and vivid. I had left it on the counter beside the spices. The dissonance was jarring, absolute, irrefutable. Recorded proof of my actions stood in direct opposition to my own deeply felt, subjective certainty. My chest felt tight, constricted by the internal conflict. Enough evasion. It was time to face the lacuna directly. I returned to the relics of my early 20s, spreading the old photographs across the coffee table like tarot cards. As I focused on certain images, the familiar somatic alarms sounded. The tightening in my chest, the tremor in my hands, the quickening breath. Then, like fragments surfacing from deep water, clearer images pierced the fog. The specific pattern of water stains on the ceiling of that rundown apartment, the pervasive smell of damp plaster and cheap tobacco, the muffled but escalating sounds of a furious argument, my own voice, ragged with emotion, and another sharp, accusatory, a crescendo of distress, then an abrupt, jarring silence. The memory fractured at that precipice. The connection finally illuminated, stark and undeniable. This present-day instability, these perceptual glitches and memory lapses, were not random neurological events. They were echoes, reverberations from that unresolved, buried trauma. I hadn't simply forgotten that summer. I had actively repressed it, walled it off. Now my own psyche, perhaps sensing a vulnerability or pushed by an internal imperative for wholeness, was forcing the confrontation. It was destabilizing my perception of the present as a means to compel engagement with the past. In that moment of clarity, a decision formed. I systematically shut down external stimuli. Laptop closed, phone silenced, curtains drawn against the afternoon light. In the quiet dimness, illuminated by the soft glow of a single reading lamp, I sat on the sofa, the photographs spread before me. I forced myself to look, to engage, pushing through the waves of physical discomfort, the sharp, stabbing pains that flared behind my eyes. Slowly, painstakingly, fragments cohered into a narrative, a profound personal crisis ignited by a devastating betrayal, a week lost in a fog of sleeplessness and despair, the desperate, hasty departure from that apartment, leaving behind not just belongings, but an unresolved piece of myself. As these memories unspooled, raw and painful, a strange mixture of profound relief and lingering terror washed through me. My heart hammered against my ribs, my mouth was dry, but my mind felt startlingly clear. I hadn't processed it. I had locked it away. My mind wasn't betraying me. It was signaling, demanding integration. I wasn't losing my grip on reality. I was being violently guided back towards a lost part of it. A tremor ran through my body, fueled by adrenaline. Yet beneath it, I felt the first tentative flicker of calm. I sat there for a long time, the old photographs arrayed like evidence, breathing slowly, deliberately, allowing the resurrected past to settle without judgment. The next step seemed obvious, necessary. I would call Anya. Uncertainty lingered. Would the perceptual distortions cease now? Would more difficult memories surface? But the paralyzing fear had loosened its grip, replaced by a fragile, nascent understanding. The disturbance was internal, a desperate communication, not a descent into madness. I gathered the photographs, stacking them neatly, closed the laptop. Rising, I felt the dull ache of prolonged stillness in my muscles. My gaze swept the living room. The familiar objects seemed reassuringly solid, anchored in their usual places. The coaster, the books, the mortar, all resided exactly where they should. My immediate world felt stable, coherent again, even as I acknowledged the internal landscape required careful, patient navigation. The documentation might continue for a while, a temporary scaffold for my unreliable perceptions, but the core panic had subsided. My mind wasn't my enemy. It was urging me toward healing. That thought, tentative as it was, offered a profound, anchoring solace. I walked towards the bedroom, switched off the light, and slid beneath the covers. My pulse still beat a rapid tattoo against my ribs, but a sense of being grounded, centered, had returned. Closing my eyes, I sensed I stood at the beginning of a difficult, necessary passage, and felt, finally, ready to embark. The sky wept sheets, a relentless curtain the wipers could only momentarily tear. Ilara strained against the hypnotic rhythm, eyes aching to discern the phantom edge of the highway dissolving into the deluge. Hours bled into one another, a futile flight from a storm that clung like a shroud. Then a flicker of lightning ripped the darkness, briefly etching a skeletal sign against the bruised heavens. Ash Creek, 5 miles. A ragged breath escaped her lips. A haven, perhaps, a place to anchor against this liquid fury. Yet, as the distance dwindled, the tempest clawed tighter. Rain hammered the roof, a deafening drum against the fragile metal shell, visibility shrinking to mere arm's length. She eased the car to a crawl, knuckles stark white against the wheel. It was then she saw it, a scar of mud veering right, marked by a leaning post bearing the crudely painted words. Ash Creek, cut through. A tremor of doubt flickered. Such paths were the stuff of cautionary tales, detours into oblivion. But the main road felt like a river intent on swallowing her whole, and the promise of quicker refuge, however dubious, beckoned. With a reluctant turn, the car groaned onto the track, tires sinking into the sodden earth. For a time, dense woods offered a fractured canopy, mitigating the rain's direct assault. The road snaked deeper, a narrowing ribbon of muck hemmed by dripping pines. A prickle of disquiet traced her spine. No other headlights pierced the gloom. No sign of human passage disturbed the oppressive solitude. Just as the conviction of a grave error solidified, her beam snagged on geometry amidst the chaos. A farmhouse, weathered but resolute, anchored in a small clearing. Lamplight, warm and golden, spilled from its mullioned windows. A barn and smaller outbuildings huddled nearby like dark satellites. Relief washed over her, potent and immediate. Not Ash Creek, perhaps, but surely sanctuary, or at least direction. She cut the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the storm's roar, and took a fortifying breath before plunging into the downpour towards the porch. Her hand lifted to knock, but the heavy oak door swung inward before her knuckles could connect. He stood framed in the doorway, a man etched by wind and sun, tall, sinewy. His gaze held surprise, certainly, but beneath it, something less readable. Vigilance, perhaps. Need something? His voice was rough-hewn, like old timber. Forgive me, Ilara stammered, a shiver tracing its path down her spine as rainwater soaked through her jacket. I was heading for Ash Creek. Took a turn, I think the wrong one. Could you possibly tell me the way? A subtle shift occurred in his features, the harsh lines softening almost imperceptibly. Ash Creek? That road don't lead there now, miss. Not since the washouts last spring. Her nascent hope plummeted. Oh, is there another route? He shook his head slowly, rain dripping from the brim of an unseen hat onto the porch boards. Not fit for travel in this. These back ways flood something fierce. Best you come inside. Wait for it to blow over. Every nerve screamed caution, urging a polite refusal, a retreat to the dubious safety of her car. But a violent explosion of thunder overhead jolted her, scattering rational thought. There was little choice. "Thank you," she murmured, stepping over the threshold into the house's embrace. The air inside was thick with the scent of wood smoke and something else, vaguely sweet, vaguely metallic. It was cozy, though crammed with an eclectic mix of furniture, worn armchairs, mismatched tables. The walls bore a tapestry of sepia photographs interspersed with archaic farming tools, relics displayed like art. A fire wrestled merrily in the stone hearth, its heat a siren call to her chilled bones. "Name's Silas," the man offered, securing the door against the tempest. "The wife, Agnes, she's back in the kitchen. Sit yourself by the fire. I'll fetch her." As Silas vanished down a shadowed hallway, Ilara drifted closer to the fireplace, drawn to the gallery of faces on the wall. A family stared back across the years. Silas, a woman presumably Agnes, and 2 children, captured at different stages of youth. Yet an unsettling discordance resonated. Their attire, their very postures, felt displaced, echoes from a bygone era, decades distant. She squinted at one image, particularly faded, trying to resolve the details, when a soft voice startled her. "Supper's nearly on the table. You're welcome to share it." Turning, Ilara saw the woman, Agnes, standing in the hallway entrance. Like Silas, she bore the imprint of the elements, but her smile seemed genuine, creasing the corners of her eyes. "Oh, I couldn't possibly intrude," Ilara began, but Agnes waved a dismissive hand. "Fiddlesticks. We seldom see new faces way out here. Company's a rare treat." Compelled by the aroma of stew that now reached her, making her stomach clench with sudden hunger, Ilara followed Agnes into the kitchen. Silas was already seated at a sturdy wooden table. Agnes indicated the chair opposite him. Conversation proved difficult terrain. Her hosts answered questions with polite brevity, but volunteered nothing, their silences punctuated only by the storm's percussion. When Ilara inquired about the town, about neighbors, a silent, unreadable communication passed between them. "Ain't much worth tellin'," Silas stated finally, his gaze distant. "We tend to keep ourselves." After the meal, Ilara's offer to help clear the table was gently rebuffed. "You rest now. Our guest," Agnes insisted. "Silas will show you the spare room. Morning will be better for travel once this lets up." Unease coiled tighter in Ilara's gut as she followed Silas up the creaking staircase. The upper floor lay steeped in shadow, navigated only by the wavering beam of Silas's oil lamp. He led her to a small chamber at the corridor's end. "Washroom's just across," he murmured. "Yell out if you need aught." As he made to withdraw, a question burst from her, unbidden. "Where are your children?" Silas halted, his hand hovering over the tarnished brass doorknob. "Children?" "The photographs," Ilara clarified, her voice feeling thin in the oppressive quiet. "Downstairs, there were 2 children in the pictures." Silence stretched, thick and heavy. When Silas finally turned, his face was a landscape of shadows, his expression indecipherable. "Those pictures," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "are from a long time past." He paused. "Sleep well." The door clicked shut, plunging her into absolute darkness. Her fingers fumbled for a light switch, finding one, flipping it uselessly. The power lines must be down, she reasoned, trying to quell the frantic drumming in her chest. She sank onto the edge of the stiff mattress, thoughts racing. Something was profoundly wrong here, an intangible dissonance she couldn't name. Outside, the storm raged unabated, rain lashing the window panes like angry claws. Sleep felt impossible. The prospect of remaining until dawn in this strange, silent house filled her with a creeping dread. Driven by restlessness, she slipped from the room, her phone's faint light carving a path through the hallway's Stygian gloom. The house breathed around her, the groaning protest of old timbers, the relentless drumming of rain. Drawn back downstairs, she found herself before the photographs again. Under the stark, artificial glare of her phone, their strangeness intensified. The faces seemed smeared, deliberately obscured, as if resisting scrutiny. And behind the figures in the periphery of every frame lurked an indistinct, shadowy presence. A floorboard sighed behind her. Ilara spun, heart leaping into her throat. Agnes stood there, her features bisected by shadow and light. "Can't find sleep?" Her voice was oddly level, devoid of inflection. I'm sorry," Ilara stammered, shrinking back. "I was just looking at the photos again." Agnes drifted closer, her gaze unwavering, pinning Ilara. "Best not to linger down here," she said softly. "It ain't safe." "What do you mean?" Ilara whispered, taking an involuntary step back. "What isn't safe?" Agnes offered no answer, only continued her slow, silent advance. Ilara bumped against something solid. Silas, blocking the path to the stairs, his presence sudden and absolute. "I regret this," he said, and the sorrow in his rough voice sounded chillingly authentic. "But you've seen things. We cannot allow you to leave." Panic ignited. Ilara ducked beneath Silas's outstretched arm, lunging for the front door. It held fast, solid and unyielding, as if fused to its frame. Behind her, the measured tread of footsteps, Silas and Agnes, unhurried, inexorable. "You fail to grasp," Agnes murmured, her voice carrying over the storm's howl. "We only mean to shield you. The storm, it isn't natural. None of this is. Ilara scrambled through the cluttered living room, then the dining area, seeking escape. But every window, every potential exit, was sealed tight. Her pursuers followed, their pace never changing, always just breaths away. "What is it you want?" she cried, finally cornered beside the cold hearth in the kitchen. Silas sighed, a sound heavy with ages. "We want nothing from you. We are ensnared, child, same as you are now. This storm, it never ceases. This night never breaks. We are caught fast, living the same hours again and again." "That's impossible," Ilara breathed. Yet the denial felt hollow even as she spoke it. The pervasive wrongness, the temporal drag she'd sensed since crossing the threshold. It resonated with his impossible words. "We hoped," Agnes added, her voice thin as worn silk, "that by keeping you, perhaps you could be spared what waits outside. But it doesn't work like that. It never has." As if summoned, lightning flared, impossibly bright, bleaching the kitchen in stark, actinic light. In that blinding, momentary truth, Ilara saw them not as flesh and bone, but as flickering silhouettes, hollowed-out shapes where people ought to be. Darkness snapped back, and they were gone. The very substance of the house around her seemed to waver, thinning like smoke, like heat haze rising from asphalt. She blinked, disoriented, finding herself abruptly back in the driver's seat of her car, parked on the muddy track where the phantom farmhouse had stood. The rain had ceased. Dawn's first tentative fingers probed through the bruised clouds and dripping trees. Tremors ran through her hands as she turned the key, the engine catching with a reassuring cough. Carefully, deliberately, she reversed, regaining the main road. Driving towards the real Ash Creek under a clearing sky, she couldn't dispel the icy conviction of having brushed against something ancient and terrible. A dream? A hallucination born of exhaustion and fear? The questions echoed unanswered. Yet sometimes late on storm-racked nights, alone on desolate roads, a flicker in the rearview mirror reveals a distant farmhouse, its windows spilling impossible warmth into the darkness. And Ilara presses down on the accelerator, eyes fixed firmly ahead, always moving forward. Some shortcuts, she now understood, lead only back into the storm, and some tempests must be weathered utterly alone.